Welcome to Combos from the Couch by LifeStance Health, where leading mental health professionals help guide you on your journey to a healthier, more fulfilling life. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Combos from the Couch. I'm Nicolette Leanza, and joining me today is LifeStance therapist Kellen Smith, and she'll be helping us to understand more about postpartum psychosis. And we'll be discussing this through the lens of the Andrea Yates case, a deeply tragic story from 2001 that brought national attention to postpartum psychosis. While this case is difficult to discuss, it's an important conversation about recognizing warning signs and ensuring families get the help they need. So, welcome, Kellen. Really great to have you on.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here today.
Definitely. So, tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to an interest in forensic psychology.
Sure. So, I've always been fascinated by human behavior, especially when I was in my late teens, early 20s. I thought that at that time I wanted to be a criminal profiler. First, I thought I wanted to be an ME, a medical examiner, because of this show at the time, Crossing Jordan. The main character was a ME, and she was very stubborn and very outspoken, and that's a lot of my personality back then. So then I figured like the biology part and all that. I was like, no, okay. Then I got more drawn into like the why people do things that they do, especially when it comes to extreme or unusual behaviors. I was always attracted to people, or they were attracted to me, I guess. I don't know, who just demonstrated some strange behavior, and always trying to help people and try to figure out why they did what they did. But honestly, early in my early adulthood, I didn't have the discipline or the direction to really pursue that path at the time and whatnot. So in the last maybe year or two, I've been watching some documentaries, and one of them which featured a social worker who is considered a forensic social worker, and it really reignited my curiosity. So I realized that forensic psychology isn't just about profiling criminals. It's about understanding the intersection between mental health, behavior, and the legal system.
Hmm.
So that really spoke to me, and especially the human side of it, how people's experiences, trauma, and environment can shape their actions. So now I'm diving deeper into learning about forensic psychology, not just from a true crime fascination as well, because like many of us were like, oh, wow, gotta watch this true crime thing, but from a place of wanting to understand and contribute to how we respond to mental illness, justice, and rehabilitation.
Great, great. Thank you for the clarification of really what it is, too, because I think there's a misnomer of what forensic psychology is, according to what we think we see on TV and stuff. So thank you for
Sure,
clarifying really what it is.
absolutely.
So, before we really dive deeper into having you tell us more specifics about Andrea Yates and her case, let's first start. Can you tell us a bit about what is postpartum psychosis?
Sure. Yeah. So it's rare, but it's very serious mental health condition that can happen after a woman gives birth, and it usually starts suddenly, often within the first few days or weeks, and it causes the woman to lose touch with reality. So just maybe having some sort of delusions or hallucinations that aren't actually occurring in real time, but up here, but it she can start to see or hear things that aren't there. And they might experience feeling really confused, having severe mood swings, become very agitated or unable to sleep. Figure the first, as a mother myself, like I remember those first couple of weeks with my
Mm-hmm.
daughter. She was a pretty good sleeper, but there were times where I
Mm-hmm.
think I was doing everything for her. So
Right.
yeah. So it's different from postpartum depression, or what they also call the baby blues,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a medical emergency that requires immediate help. So with the right treatment, which can include medication, hospital care, most women recover fully. But early recognition, support from family, friends, healthcare providers, it's very key to help prevent that postpartum psychosis component of all of that.
And I think emphasizing that this is something that could be navigated through that someone can get better from, for sure.
Absolutely.
Which is, I think, so key why we're having this conversation about Andrea Yates, because as you'll share, I mean, there's so many moving components to the case, and what maybe we'll even be talking about something that could have been done differently to maybe
Sure.
this would have been a different outcome. So
Right.
let's jump in. Tell us about the case.
Sure. So her case is one of the most tragic and well known examples of postpartum psychosis in the US. So in 2001, she was a mother from Texas who drowned five of her children, all five of her children, while she experienced a very severe episode of postpartum psychosis. And come to find out during the trial and everything, she had a very long, extensive history of mental illness, including postpartum depression, psychotic symptoms after previous pregnancies. And despite receiving treatment, her condition worsened after her last and fifth child. During that trial of hers, a lot of experts testified she was suffering from it. And and even though she was convicted of murder, the conviction was overturned later because in that retrial that she ended up having, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity and was committed to a state mental hospital instead of prison. So her case really changed the national conversation about maternal mental health. They raised awareness about how serious postpartum disorders can be and how critical early intervention and support are for new mothers. So she had that extensive history and she had different medications, and I don't know if that she ever did specific like therapies for it. I didn't quite come across that
Mhm.
um as I've read her case, but I know her husband knew
Mhm.
that she was struggling with these and she should have never been left alone with the kids. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, she was. And a lot of people around her missed those signs for whatever reason.
Which is, let's look at that. Like, what were some of those warning signs that Yates was struggling with psychosis before the tragedy?
Sure. So, there were many that she was struggling with way before this happened. So after each of her pregnancies, she did have severe postpartum depression. After her fourth child, she had a full psychotic episode that required her to be hospitalized.
Wow. Okay.
And at that time, she reported hearing voices, having delusional thoughts. At one point, she was afraid or she believed that she was a bad mother, that her children were in danger because of her, which that should have been a huge red flag,
Right. And
right?
I want to emphasize that right there because I think that delusion that, okay, I'm a bad mother, that,
Right.
there wasn't, she didn't just wake up evilly and be like, I'm going to kill my children. There was a whole
Exactly.
path to this. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. She had attempted suicide more than once. And okay, so she did have medication and therapy, but I don't know, her mental health declined. It continued to
Hmm.
decline because then she stopped taking her medication, which is common. A lot of times
Right. The
people,
side
you know,
effects, things like that
side
can.
effects, they're like,
Hmm.
oh, this is like affecting my sex drive or
Right.
my
Right.
sleep.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so she stopped doing the medication and then she was isolated at home. She didn't really go out anywhere.
Okay.
Some of her family and doctors expressed like serious concerns about her condition, warning about against having more children because of a risk of like relapse in having
Hmm.
another psychotic episode. So the warning signs I would say were severe depression, delusions, hallucination, suicidal thoughts and attempts, withdrawal from reality, which are all indicators of postpartum psychosis that needed sustained intensive care. As I was thinking of preparing for this last
Hmm.
night, thinking about kind of like how this, interview was going to go, I was thinking too, I wonder like for veterans, for example, they have an option to sometimes, depending on where they're at in life and if they've gotten hurt in combat, things like that. they have access to, like, caregivers that can come and hang out with them and help
Yeah.
them with certain things around their home or help them, stay on track with medications and things of that
Mhm.
nature. I wondered they have something called respite care for
Yeah.
parents, right?
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
wonder how, because some people can't afford it or
Right. Right.
whatever the reason, for some reason, people don't really use it or have as much
Right.
access to it. I was thinking that would be an interesting thing to have, like
Definitely. Imagine if she did have some of
right,
those resources there. If she had some respite for the kids or some wraparound services like case management or something to make sure she was navigating her postpartum and her psychosis in a different way. Maybe that could have prevented this from happening too. Right.
absolutely. She could have had somebody there to talk to, maybe have
Right.
coffee with in between
Right.
taking
Right.
care of
Yeah.
kids and
Right.
or
Right.
tea or whatever, but just
Right.
somebody that got almost like, how they have like the big brothers, big sisters,
Yeah. Yeah.
almost like a mentor, but for an adult.
Yeah. Yeah. Mentor for new moms, or she
Yeah,
said, or a mentor for moms in general during this time. Parents, yeah, definitely.
absolutely.
So,
I have one child and it's just sometimes, and she has autism. So sometimes it's kind of like I have like three kids in one.
yeah, yeah, and that's another point of parenting children who might have different needs or special needs, and sometimes how stressful that is. A
Right,
lot of times, how stressful that is, needing that support. So, yeah, so I appreciate you bringing this up that there were warning signs. Again, she didn't just wake up one day and in an evil fit, like, I'm going to kill my children. There were
right,
signs she was struggling significantly with her mental health. And I think because of that delusion, it sounds like now delusions, it might make sense to the person having them, but maybe not to everyone else. But it sounds like
right,
there's something with the delusion of like, I'm a bad mom. I have to save my children. And it sounds like it's something like, okay, to save them, must kill them. And so
right,
whatever that delusion was, she followed through on that, unfortunately. So I think, I appreciate this conversation with you because I think we're just trying to humanize her a bit of what
right.
she was navigating.
You're
This is not a serial killer. This isn't
right,
this individual.
exactly.
So, how does someone experiencing psychosis lose that ability to distinguish between the delusions and reality?
Yeah. So a lot of times when somebody is experiencing psychosis, their brain essentially is misinterpreting what's real and what's not. Maybe if I'm a new mom and I'm starting to have psychosis, yeah, I could be sitting here talking to you, but then I think there's a chair behind you. I might see a dead relative out of nowhere
Mm,
or a pink elephant and think that that's
right,
real for some reason. Not to make fun of,
right,
delusions or
right.
hallucinations, but just kind of out of nowhere, maybe, seeing
Mm,
something of that nature. So there's parts of the brain that help us process reality, our perceptions, thoughts, and beliefs. So when that stops communicating properly is when we'll start to have those delusions or
right,
hallucinations that can lead to hearing things, seeing things that aren't there, and can lead to fixed false beliefs that completely feel real to them. So,
right.
with any case or anybody you've worked with, maybe somebody that has schizophrenia, for
Yeah,
example,
yeah.
um, they may really think, or like that movie, A Beautiful Mind,
Yes,
that was based
yeah.
on the fella who had like 5 people he saw and talked to every day,
Right,
but
right.
and they all had some sort of I can't remember now, it's been a while since I watched the movie, but I believe they all
Mm-hmm.
had some sort of significance in his life.
Right.
So, when someone's in that state, those thoughts or voices don't feel made up, they feel as real as anything else. It's
Yes.
like having those 5 people just
Yeah.
hanging out with you.
Yeah.
So their brain's sending a powerful, convincing signals that something's true, even if it isn't. So that's
Mm.
why it's not about logic or willpower. It's a medical crisis, not a
Yes.
choice.
Right.
So, in the case of postpartum psychosis, it can be made worse by hormonal changes, that sleep
Yeah.
deprivation, baby crying every two
Right.
seconds, an overwhelming emotional stress because you love that kid so much, but you also want to sleep. And
Yes.
you also feel as a mom, I think, I can't say every mom, but I know for myself and a lot of people I know and whatnot, sometimes we get to that like, okay, well, I know you're the grandparent or you're the dad or the whatever, but you can't do this like I can because I'm the mom because I carried the kid for 10 months. And so it's all
Mhm.
me. So that's why early recognition and immediate medical treatment are
Mhm.
very important because in that moment, the person truly can't tell the difference between that reality and the delusion
Right.
they're experiencing.
It makes me think real briefly of another case became aware of, and this happened in like early 90s, mid 90s, where
Sure.
a gentleman who was already diagnosed with schizophrenia had the delusion that his father was full of aliens, and to
Right.
extinguish the aliens, he needed to kill his father. Now there's that delusion there,
Right.
right? It's not rational, but in his mind, that made sense. That was him buying into that delusion. So he killed his father, thinking he was expelling the aliens from his father. Hence, his father, it was seen as a murder, but then it had to be proven to show, well, he's already been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and this is one of his delusions. So it's close to this case with Andrea Yates of that delusion playing out where dire
Right.
consequences happen. And so it comes butts right up against the legal system. And how do you navigate that? Which, how
Right.
do we balance that accountability with understanding severe mental illness in cases like these?
Sure. That's one of the hardest questions, I think, because how do we hold someone accountable while also recognizing that severe mental illness can completely distort a person's sense of reality, right? So, in cases like Andrea Yates, it's important to remember that psychosis isn't a moral failing or a choice, it's a medical crisis, right? So, when someone's mind is overtaken by delusions or hallucinations, they're not operating with the
Right.
capacity to understand their actions the way that a healthier person would, right?
Mhm,
So that's
mhm,
why our legal system has the not guilty by reason of insanity standard. So it
mhm.
doesn't mean that there's no accountability. It means accountability looks different. So
Yeah,
instead of punishment, the focus shifts to treatment, safety, and recovery. So these individuals usually hospitalized and not released into society, right? So they often spend
mhm,
years in a secure psychiatric facility, hospital care. So balancing justice and compassion means realizing both truths that a terrible tragedy occurred, that the person responsible was gravely ill and in need of treatment, not punishment. So
right.
ultimately, understanding these cases helps us focus on prevention, on getting people help before it ever reaches that point. And, just to kind of touch on that, like as a personal thing. So I had someone I was close to in my late teens who I found out later on after getting to know this person that they had schizophrenia and they
Okay.
struggled a lot. And
Yeah.
years later, this person, unfortunately was murdered by another fella who had severe delusions and hallucinations when he was not in his right state of mind. And so
Got
it
you.
really was a tragic situation. And this close friend of mine had died. So I decided to reach out to the guy who had killed this close friend of mine. His name
Yeah.
was Robin. The guy that killed him was Kyle. And I reached out to Kyle, like, hey, I just want to let you know I forgive you for what you did. I read some of your case and everything, and I just wanted you. I thought you should know that.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, Robin was disconnected from his family because of his illness, and
Got you.
a few months later, his mom passed away from brain cancer. So it was really sad all around.
Yeah.
Um, but just trying to, reading some of the case of Kyle and his evaluations and, hearing that um, he was on some medications that also interacted really negatively for him because
Mhm.
everybody, their bodies
Right.
react differently to
Right.
medications. So it was hard to do, but I just felt like I should reach out to the kid and just tell him that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And he really appreciated that. And
Yeah.
just trying to
Sure, it
learn
meant a
from
lot
some
to
of
him, I'm
this.
sure.
Yeah,
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 sure. I and I feel compelled to make a point too, because I know we're sharing stories of psychosis and schizophrenia where real dire consequences or tragedies happen. I think the majority of people navigating psychosis, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder with psychotic symptoms are we're not seeing violence to the end of
Right.
tragedy. So I guess I just want to put that out there that not to feed in any sort of stigma of because someone's diagnosed
Right.
with schizophrenia that they're going to kill someone. So we're
Exactly.
talking
There's
about
a lot.
specific cases here, but go ahead.
Exactly. There's a lot of people that live with schizophrenia or
Mm-hmm.
schizoaffective disorder who don't do anything. There's more of people that have it, that live with it and deal with it every day
Yeah,
and don't do anything to anyone.
very true. Kellen, oh my gosh, this has been a really informative and interesting conversation about the Andrea
Absolutely.
Yates case. I appreciate you being willing to do this episode with me too, as we were
Sure.
delicately trying to present the case to help people understand at a deeper level, from the perspective of two therapists of what we saw going on here. So I really appreciate, love to have you back on. Maybe we'll cover another case.
Absolutely. This is great. I really appreciate it. And thank you.
Welcome. I also want to thank the team behind the podcast, Jason Clayton and Juliana Whitten. Thank you for listening to Converse from the Couch. Take care, everyone.